The GBA port of Donkey Kong Country came out in 2003, and as a whole, is kind of like an attempt to normalize the game to be more like its sequels. There's a lot of carryovers, but we'll get into that. When you first start up a file, an intro cutscene is played that explains the plot of the game. The cutscene is more or less an abridged version of the story that's in the manual of the original Donkey Kong Country game. The two-player contest option when starting a new file was removed. This option was also removed in the Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3 remakes as well. Likely because, well, it's not really feasible. I mean, I guess you could do it with a link cable, but it's easier just to do, like, two-player, team, as it were. There's quite a few aesthetic differences with this port, and I'll do my best to go for all the main ones I could figure out. Right off the bat, the entire overall game has been brightened up in order to be easier to see on an original Game Boy Advance, though this sadly does result in much of the game looking a bit too bright and washed out on systems with a backlight. The Kong letters look and spin around as they do in later Donkey Kong Country games, in contrast to the way that they always face the screen, look metallic, and sparkle and shimmer in the original. The Kong letters here, and in the sequels, and even in Donkey Kong Country 2 and 3, look more glossy and rubber-like. Most enemies have had their color palettes changed around. Normal naughties are blue instead of gray, for example. The most notable of which are critters, who mostly feature completely different colors in this game. Basic walking ones in this game are purple instead of green, whereas green critters are completely absent from the game. Almost. For some reason, the original colors of some enemies are briefly featured in the credits, including the critters, which then raises the question of, why did they bother changing around so many of their colors? It's nice to see, like, it's a nice change of pace to see different palette combos, but it's just, like, they're still in the game. It's just an odd decision, I don't know, it's weird. Speaking of which, Very Naughty and Really Naughty have also swapped colors, and in accordance to the normal Naughty's color change, so Really Naughty's blue instead of the greenish-gray Very Naughty once was. A few unused elements from the original game that were kept in the data are used in this port. For example, Neckies drop feathers when defeated, and Rambi has more frames of animation. And Cranky Kong now walks in after defeating a boss. Not to mention that he now says a lot of his unused dialogue from the original. He has so much unused dialogue in the original, like, I think he has tips for nearly every level in the game, and it's almost all dummied out. And the only tips he says in the original game is for the first world for some reason. It's very weird, but he says them now. That's cool. There's also various unused background animals and such that appear on animals, like clownfish appearing underwater. There's spiders in caves. Now there are little, like, small, like, snakes and stuff around. It's a pretty cool touch. Many of the different parts of level backgrounds have been edited. For example, many parts of the walls and mine levels are removed, and you can actually see the background through them. The farthest background layer of Slip Slide Ride is now filled with more gems, instead of being a varying shade of purple. And, for whatever reason, Loopy Light's background is changed to be the same as Minecart Carnage and Misty Mine. Also, at the end of Jungle Hijinks, the time of day doesn't change to night, unlike in the original. And in the same vein, Ropey Rampage's Tropical Storm doesn't clip at the end either. I'm not sure why they didn't do this, but who knows, maybe it doesn't work quite the same. It's just, there's lots of weird little inconsistencies like that. Additionally, various foreground objects were added to some of the level environments that lacked them. For example, temple levels have trees and columns in front, and forest levels have varying sizes of leaves in front. The barrel cannons that warp you to bonus areas now sport a big B in the front, and bonus areas now have title cards like Find the Exit and Spell It Out. These are carryovers from the sequels. A big change are the sound effects used in game. Many of them are completely different from the original game, and are often taken from other rare games like Donkey Kong 64. Plus, there are a few more moments that play sound effects than in the original. Like, for example, many enemies play a sound when first appearing on screen, like Naughties or Neckies. The music in general is just the same songs using the GBA instruments. Some of them sound kinda bad, to be honest, but some of them actually sound pretty cool. In particular, Treetop Rock actually has like almost a completely different sound to it because it has different emphasis on the notes, with the background melody being more in the forefront of the GBA version. Also notable is that the credits take place on Gangplank Galleon, the final level, instead of DK's treehouse. Here, the credits have a bit more dynamic movement, with the camera kind of scrolling around a bit, so that aquatic enemies don't just kind of hover over the ground. Instead, it goes down to the water and you can see them swimming around. Plus, many of the enemies don't just walk right to left anymore, doing a little bit more interesting movement. Finally, there was a bit of an odd Easter egg added to the game. That's the best way I can put it, where Very Naughty appears in DK's treehouse after defeating Really Naughty. When you walk in, he'll freak out a bit and just kind of run out the door behind you. This is a one-time event and it's just... I don't even know why. It's just weird. Who knows? Anyways, let's talk about some new gameplay additions. So, there's this new score attack mode in the game called DK Attack. In this mode, the goal is to basically go through levels collecting as many items as you can as fast as you can. It's kind of fun, but a little generic and shallow, to be honest. It's something you might do a couple times and then stop afterwards. That's what I did. Because it's very basic. You just play the same levels, but oh, you get points now. The more interesting addition is the new mode called Hero Mode. In this mode, it's basically a single player mode in a sense, where you just control a yellow Diddy, like the 2-player mode contest, color costume thing. And when you play as Diddy, you have to complete every level without the help of Star Barrels or DK, so no midpoints, and it's just solo Diddy. This is basically the hard mode of the game, and it's actually pretty fun to play through, since Diddy as a whole is just very satisfying to play as. I mean, who doesn't like playing as Diddy? What's kind of interesting about this new mode is that in the normal game, to get 101% completion, you have to collect all of the Kong letters and fill up the new picture scrapbook that I'll go over in a sec. But in Hero Mode, you get 101% just the same way you do in the originals. Speaking of which, a scrapbook very similar to the sticker book in the Game Boy Color version was added. The Kongs have to collect photographs throughout the game in order to add pictures to it. You get pictures through varying tasks, typically defeating a certain enemy or just going to certain spots. Unlike the Game Boy Color version, these pictures are purely for fun. You can't print them out. I mean, not that many people use that feature in the first place, but I don't know. It's I guess it's whatever, but it is a little strange. I mean, did the Game Boy Advance ever have a printer? I want to say it did, but whatever. There's a few quality of life changes in this port too. The game now remembers the number of lives and bananas you have when you saved, while the original doesn't save them, though this feature is actually, ironically, just like in the Game Boy Color version, mostly pointless, given that you can save anywhere on the map in this port, and not just at candies. In fact, you can even save after getting a midpoint, which makes lives completely pointless, in fact, because even if you run out of lives, you just go back to the midpoint because you load your save, so I don't know. It's just funny. Speaking of which, Candy and Funky both have minigames to play now because saving and flying is just done through a menu. You don't have to go anywhere. Funky's is basically the exact same fishing game from the Game Boy Color version, just, it looks better. Candy's game is more or less just a DDR game using the D-pad and A and B buttons. These are actually pretty fun time wasters, just like the Game Boy Color version, though unfortunately the cranky shooter game did not come back, which, I mean, this is just personal opinion, but I thought that was always the funnest of the original games because it's got quite a few different things you can do with just one basic thing. The warp barrels in Vulture Culture Treetop Town Slip Slide Ride were removed. This is because warp barrels were added into the early levels, so that every level in Congo Jungle and Monkey Mines have one. This is another carryover from the sequels, which only have warp barrels in the first 2 worlds. Also, oddly enough, the warp barrel in Millstone Mayhem is in a different spot. I don't know why. Basically, instead of requiring you to bring the tire near the start, You just kind of go in the barrel near the tire spot that you break it open, and instead of going right, you just hold left, and it shoots you up into the bonus. I don't know why they changed that. I guess they wanted it to be easier to find, but I mean, the warps are supposed to be hard to find, so it just seems strange. Also, when you enter a warp barrel, you're sent into a short area that contains a group of bananas that spell out the word warp, unlike the original. There's also pictures scrolling around in the background that are scenes from the game's level, which is pretty cool. And the ground you walk on is actually the ice ground tile set from Donkey Kong Country 2, the ice levels from that game, which is an interesting touch. I don't know if it's really a cool touch, but it's interesting, I guess. Finally, as an addition for the Japanese version of the original Donkey Kong Country, Rock Crocs can now be defeated by Donkey Kong's hand slap move when they're curled up in the ball. Which is, you know, just like in that game, it's really not that useful, but I mean, it's still neat. It's cool you can do it. The biggest change in this port of the game are the bosses. Most of the bosses are actually quite a bit different from the original game, though even though there was always a thing that the original game's bosses were piss easy, a lot of them are actually even easier here than they were in the original. Basically, let's just go over the differences. Very Naughty leaps across the map when you hurt him, but instead of just kind of sitting around and just kind of starting to leap again. But when he leaps across the map, he just hangs on the edge, and he jumps really high, so unless you're literally jumping into him when he's doing it, he's not going to hurt you. So it actually makes it easier because it gives you more time to react. I don't know. It's weird. This is the theme with all the bosses. They change up what they do, but it actually makes it easier. It's really weird. Master Neki is actually pretty much identical to the original version, though. The only significant difference that I could find is that takes a little bit longer for him to be vulnerable after spinning out a nut. Queen Bee now gets several zingers that surround her when she gets hit and turns red. And instead of chasing you for a period of time, instead you just defeat the wasps by throwing barrels at them. Also, a minor change is that the barrels fall from the sky instead of just kind of poofing in. Once again, the fact that there's more to do is kind of cool, but she doesn't chase you when she's hanging around invincible, so it's not really like stressful. You just kind of avoid her. Really Naughty now makes stalactites fall from the ceiling when he jumps really high after being hit. And instead of chasing you down with high leaps, he just leaps to the side of the arena when you do that. This change is really bizarre because the arena is not indoors. It takes place outside. You can see that in the background. Like, I guess they just didn't notice? I mean, I guess the background is pretty dark. It's just weird. Also, when you defeat Dum Drum's mobs, now a TNT barrel appears and you just throw it at them. Finally, in the Master Neki Senior fight, both the big Nekis appear instead of just one. Overall, the changes to the bosses are just really weird. Like, most of them are just easier than the originals. In particular, Dum Drum is pathetic because when he's normally trying to slam down on you in the original, in this game, he'll drop down once, just really slow, pretty much making it like a free throw to just hit him with the TNT. I don't know. And Really Naughty is also really easy because he jumps to the side just like Very Naughty, and like the stalactites fall, but you just walk in between them. It's not like they're like, it only falls once. There's no like worrying about like getting hit. It's just, they're all just so easy. Like, the only boss that's actually harder is the final Neki Senior fight, which this boss is actually pretty interesting because having two big Nekis in the fight actually adds a bit of strategy, because when you defeat one of them, the other one will just resume the attack pattern of the original fight. So it kind of adds an element of like strategy. Like, do you want to keep both of them alive as long as possible so that when the second phase starts you can just kill the last one with one hit? Or do you just focus on one of them because that way it clears up space, they're not kind of making you as claustrophobic? But yeah, other than that, the other bosses just feel pathetic compared to the Neki Senior fight. It's really weird. The final big change is that the maps have mostly been completely redesigned except for the first one. Though on the world map, the Kongs follow curved pathways between each level, rather than the mostly straight lines in the original. Did you ever notice that? In the original game, there's two curved paths at the start of the first world, and that's it. You go on one curve to the next level, you go to Cranky, you go on another curve to go to the cave, and then you go on another curve past the ocean, and that's it. Every other pathway in the entire game is a straight line. It's very strange, but we're talking about the port, so. The maps in the port are generally more zoomed in and more detailed as a result, but they also take longer to traverse because of this, because especially in for some of the boss paths, like walking from the last level to the boss can take like 10 seconds. Maybe not quite that long, but still quite a while. It's kind of annoying, actually. It'd be nice if there was a way to speed it up. Oddly enough, too, from World 3 onwards, a few of the levels are just in completely different order. Like, Temple Tempest is the 4th level in Vine Valley in the original game, but in this port, they decided to make it the final level because the way you go through the world just makes it the last level. It's just weird. Minecart Madness is another one where it's the last level of Kremkrock Industries rather than the 5th. I mean, that's only a one change, but still, there's a lot of little differences. Most of the levels are just in like slightly different order. It's weird. Alright, now let's get to the nice meat and potatoes, the actual physics and gameplay of the port. I say that, but this is actually probably just the quickest part, because it's mostly just, like, it's better than the Game Boy Color port. Imports never really drop. They're more accurate to the original games for the most part. But the one big thing I found that's really weird and different from the original game is the way... well, two things. The one is the way you interact with walls, and two is the way that you slow down. For whatever reason, it takes a lot longer to slow down in this game, like, especially if you're on Rambi. Like, okay, think about in the first level where there's that wall you break with Rambi, and you go the other side. From that area, if I'm on the ledge above, if I run full speed and stop when I reach that ledge, Rambi will keep walking and get all the way to the wall and break it down because it takes him like 4 or 5 seconds to stop moving from a run. It's kind of ridiculous, actually. Also, the other thing that kind of has to do with this is that with walls, when you run against a wall, your momentum still builds up, even though you're moving into the wall. So you can like jump up from the wall and just kind of zoom off because you're technically still moving full speed. Like, as a random example that showcases both of these things, trying to climb up to DK's treehouse in the first level is really awkward because momentum kind of weirdly carries over while you're like pushing the wall, makes it hard to get up. And especially, I was doing it with Rambi and it just makes it impossible. It's just like that's the only major thing I could find. There's no other problems with the physics. It's really weird. I don't know. It's strange, but whatever. Overall, the port is a pretty solid addition to the Donkey Kong Country series. I'd consider this port kind of mostly inferior to the original, but I mean, it's a mobile port. What are you gonna do? It's a good mobile port. If you don't want to just sit around in one spot playing on SNES, there you go.